Hello again, and welcome everyone to this seminar on accelerating the move to zero carbon road transport. My name is Alf Martinez-Felipe, and I am delighted to be the host of this fantastic seminar because we have fantastic people speaking today, and some of our panelists from the university, but also from different companies. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have a great conversation around this hot topic. Well, just to give you some context, I'm here probably because I am the champion of the hydrogen theme in the Center for Energy Transition, which is the center that is organizing this seminar, which is a center that covers different disciplines across the university in collaboration with different colleagues from companies and also policymakers and regulators. So if you want to know more about the Center for Energy Transition, please go to our website and you'll see the different disciplines that we have. We cover aspects from oil and gas transition into hydrogen, as I mentioned as well, but green integration, policy, business, etc. It's quite exciting. So I'm going to just give you an overview of what the seminar is going to be about, and then I'm going to let the ground to our speakers. We're going to have a first set of short talks by our external speakers today. They'll be around 5 minutes, for 5 minutes each. And after that, we'll just spend the last 30 minutes or so, hopefully in a very engaging conversation with questions and answers from the audience. So I encourage you to use the label you have in your Teams screen to make your questions already. You don't need to wait until we get into the second half of the session. And if you can, please tell us to whom that question should be addressed. That would be fantastic. We can then make a question to the speaker in person. If you like one question in particular from someone else, we also encourage you to like it. I think you can somehow label that, and then the questions with more likes or with more tags then will be pushed forward, and then we will be able to prioritize those as well. There are not many slides for today's sessions, but I know that the session will be recorded, and I will get back to this as well by the end of the session too. So don't worry about that if you miss any bit of it. And I think we're probably ready to start by introducing our first external speaker. Well, I'd like to say as well that obviously transport is a particularly interesting topic because we all experience transport in our lives. We need to move from one place to another, and we are aware that the impact they can have. I'm hoping that today we're going to have different views from the technical point of view, but also from the social impact that these activities have. So it's a great pleasure to introduce you the first speaker today, who is I would probably say an old friend of the university now, who is David Rogers, who has 5 years experience in the energy industry and over, and over 20 years as a civil servant. David has rejoined the Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group in the role of CEO from the 1st of October this year. He's coming back home, and he returns where he spent 4 years as a communication manager between 2005 and 2009. After that time, he joined Vattenfall and supported the development of the Catelyn Cottrell onshore wind farm near Huntley, as well as the European Offshore Wind Development Centre, of which AREC was a driving partner before joining Shell in 2012, when he worked on upstream communications and as a mentor to the Aberdeen University and Strike-Light Eco Vehicle teams. That's where I actually came across David for the first time, and that's really interesting thing. So David, it's now all over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Alf, and really just great to be here, during a really important couple of weeks, not just for Scotland, but for the planet in terms of COP26 and, the backdrop event for everything that we're speaking about today. I have just chosen a very quick, simple slide to get going, and I guess my idea here was just to sort of show you the vehicle that I first ever wanted to drive, which was the Sinclair C5. As a teenager in the 1980s, this vehicle could be purchased actually for probably about under £1,000, and this was Clive Sinclair's electric vehicle, which it drew a little bit of criticism in some quarters from a sort of safety perspective, but I actually finally got to drive one of these machines in 2006. My young son accompanied me on the journey, and I should point out on the photograph that the little wind turbine is not part of the power system. That was purely for demonstration purposes to show the turbines going around when the car moved. But yeah, and thank you, Alf. You alluded to some of my involvement in previous role just with the eco marathon teams, the eco vehicle teams, indeed, for Strathclyde University and for Aberdeen. That's the picture in the middle of the Aberdeen team in 2019, who were the best placed UK university in terms of their incoming hydrogen car, a design which they are quite rightly very, very proud of. And it was great to see the evolution of that project, as it were. Because of lockdown, the two universities couldn't actually kind of meet face to face. So the image on the right is a hydrogen car of the future that the two universities were able to develop using Teams, Zoom, mobile phone calls, emails, exchange of images, etc. So it's a great visual image of how the sort of STEM piece and the sort of working together can result in something very impressive, and the both universities received a fair bit of publicity for that. However, just briefly from my perspective, obviously part of Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group, we're going into our 20th year, pleased to say, with about 216 member companies, and that reflects a broad cross-section of the very big to the very small companies active in renewable energy projects and active in trying to drive the energy transition. The group's probably better known for the wind farm that you see out in Aberdeen Bay, which was developed in partnership with Vattenfall. But from an ARIC perspective, we're also very involved in STEM promotion, in the sort of skills that the energy transition is going to need. And we work closely with the likes of Aberdeen Science Centre. So just quickly on the city and the city's energy credentials. I mean, the energy credentials are going to play a big part in terms of what the eventual sort of vehicle makeup will be in the city. And I think it's true to say we're seeing the effects of energy transition already. We've got net zero Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire targets. We obviously have the wind farm, which I mentioned, and 2 floating wind farms up and down the coast as well. We've one of the largest hydrogen fleet of buses in Aberdeen, along with some associated motor cars. We've got plans for a net zero technology centre already established, and plans for an energy transition zone in the city. So things are really happening. It is an oil and gas city. There is a North Sea transition deal that's there to see the oil industry decarbonise their offshore operations, but it's a deal that's also there to try and see that some of the skills that are needed for this energy transition are carried forward, and we don't disadvantage ourselves as a region, and indeed disadvantage industry in terms of being able to be part of that energy transition. So lots of exciting things happening on wind energy, on hydrogen, and on the broader sort of sphere. From a vehicle perspective, my view on the vehicle side of things is that we've got a very big task in terms of the energy transition and the public reception of the energy transition. We need to be sure that we're giving the information that the public need in terms of understanding what's happening here. There's going to be some very high level announcements coming out of COP26, but what does that actually mean for the region in terms of future projects, in terms of transport, and in terms eventually of individual choices in terms of new technologies, whether that is indeed for electric or hydrogen vehicles, but it's also down to individual choices in households in terms of how you power your house, how you power your everyday life. So lots of exciting things happening. Pleased to be part of it once more through Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group, and looking forward to some questions later.
Thank you indeed, David. Very exciting times, and I think you made a good point about Aberdeen being an oil and gas city, transitioning nicely towards this revolution and green revolution, and there's a lot going on. So let's move on with our next speaker, who is joining us from the States. It's much appreciated because it's quite early in the morning. Catelyn Logan, who's here with us today, is a postdoctoral research fellow in urban climate action at the University of Arizona, where she's at the moment. And as part of the University Climate Change Coalition program, her role involves collaborating with community stakeholders on applied solutions that can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions to meet Tucson's climate neutrality targets. So prior to that, Catelyn was with us here at Aberdeen, where she did her PhD in environmental sciences and worked as an energy policy researcher also at the University College of Dublin in Ireland. Catelyn's research involves infrastructure changes, including electricity supply and the related trade-offs between greenhouse gas emission reductions, climate regulation, and the potential impact upon ecosystems. Through several international secondments, Catelyn had the opportunity to understand what lessons can be learned from other countries regarding decarbonization policy and low emission transport. And I think this is one of the nice aspects of this seminar, that we have people from different countries and different backgrounds. And I'm pretty sure, Catelyn, that your international view will be very much appreciated by the attendees as well. So I just let you the floor. If you want to give a short presentation, please.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. My name is Catherine, and today I'll just be giving a brief overview of how I got to where I am in Arizona and some of the highlights from some of my research. Before I start, I always like to show this image because I think it gives a really good overview of what my research highlights, insofar as you can't take a siloed approach to greenhouse gas emission reduction when it comes to electric transport, and we need to take a collaborative approach, and why we need to think about the energy sector and all these other sectors when we're looking at decarbonising transport. So as Alf mentioned, I did my PhD at the University of Aberdeen, and I focused on the electrification of transport and its impact on natural capital and ecosystem services. So as we transition towards net zero cars, buses and trains, what does this mean in terms of the area we're going to need for additional energy infrastructure? What are the emissions going to be like? What is the best type of transport, whether we go for electric or hydrogen, and what are those potential consequences? So as part of that, I spent some time at Tsinghua University in China and Kyoto University in Japan, where I was doing sort of various different projects looking at different transport types. So electric cars in China and electric trains and hydrogen trains in Japan. After that, I spent a year at University College Dublin, where I was working as an energy policy researcher, but also in partnership with the local government. And we were looking at implementing different strategies to help decarbonise our transport sector. So my work there primarily focused on plug-in electric vehicles, on whether the city or the government, should continue to fund subsidies for plug-in electric vehicles, and whether it's a good move forward or whether they should transition just towards electric vehicles. My work now, I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Arizona, so I'm currently working with the city of Tucson to help them design a climate action plan to make sure that they're able to meet their net zero targets by 2030. With my background focusing on transport and energy, which is very interesting for me anyways, because a lot of the US is focused on as a sort of car orientated town, and we're sort of beginning to try and move towards installing different bike facilities and becoming a bit more of an active travel community, especially in Tucson. But again, it's quite challenging. I just wanted to highlight these graphs from my research, where we looked at the tailpipe emissions of cars, buses and trains between 2020 and 2050 for conventionally fueled electric and hydrogen, using the national grid 2 degrees electricity scenarios to basically project what could be the best move going forward in terms of to fuel these vehicles. So the black dashed line indicates a 95% reduction in transport emissions, which we use to represent a net zero reduction. The blue line represents a conventionally fueled method of transport, and even with the technological improvements, it's clear to see that the Conventionally fueled method of transport produces the most emissions for all different vehicles. So your personal cars, your petrol diesel cars, your personal your petrol or diesel buses, and the same with the trains. The pink line represented the hydrogen method of transport. And for most of the transport methods, obviously, emissions were significantly lower. However, for electric transport, which is the yellow line, most of this sort of fell below the net zero target. However, based on the challenges of different types of transport fuels, it might actually be more beneficial to incorporate both hydrogen and electric transport because of the different ranges that these vehicles can have. And just to sort of quickly finish off, I wanted to show this slide here, which is something that we're currently addressing or hoping to address, is some of the challenges for low carbon transport integration. And that sort of focuses on the monetary side of things, so the cost of the infrastructure itself, as well as the vehicles. Electric and hydrogen buses are much more expensive than your diesel buses. So more companies can be inclined from a monetary side of things to sort of continue doing that, although we're going to struggle to meet our net zero targets. Another big challenge is energy storage, to make sure that we don't have significant impact on the electricity grid, and how we can reduce that as far as possible. Another sort of big key challenge is looking at sort of alternative travel, so encouraging people away from petrol and diesel personal vehicles onto public transport and active travel. And then finally, I just wanted to quickly mention how we can reduce our emissions further, and whether we need to think about carbon capture and storage technologies as a method to reduce our emission levels. Thank you.
Well, that was great. Thank you, Catelyn. And I think you've touched upon some of the things that we may discuss later on today, like, for example, how we rethink the way we use transport, right? And how we can do that sustainably and as a customer as well. To what I am, I'm willing to refuse to give away for this, for reaching this sustainability too, which is interesting as well. So we move back to the UK. Our next speaker is John Bertwistle, who's head of policy for First Group UK Bus Division. And he leads initiatives on a variety of subjects, including policy and legislation, authority partnership, business opportunities, autonomous vehicles trials, concessionary travel, vehicle technology, legal issues, European policy and legislation, ticketing schemes, and many other. He has been advising on the implementation of bus rapid transit in the UK and the United States too. John has represented First and the UK bus industry on a number of governmental and industry committees. He sits on the executive of the Rural Services Partnership, the Traveline and Journey Solution boards, and was the 2016 president of the Confederation of Passenger Transport, the UK Bus and Coach Trade Association. He is currently president of the European Passenger Transport Operators Association, which is, I think, a private board. So, John, I guess that you don't have the slides, but you do have quite a lot of experience, as we can see, in many different fields. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alf. Good afternoon, everyone. So First is absolutely committed to decarbonising its bus fleet. We will be zero carbon by 2035, which actually isn't that far away. And we're not buying any more new diesel buses after 2022. Within the last 12 months, we have completed the electrification of the Park and Ride operation in York. We have begun our investment in electric buses in Glasgow, where our Caledonia depot has been running 22 brand new electric single-deck buses, providing shuttle services for the attendees at COP26. And we will have 150 electric buses at Caledonia, which we think is probably the biggest bus depot, certainly in Britain, possibly in Western Europe, within 18 months. But we're approaching decarbonisation in a sort of a twin track way. Electricity isn't always the answer. Sometimes the routes aren't suitable for electrification because they're too long, for instance, interurban routes, country bus services, or the amount of service which is operated in a given day exceeds the available capacity of the batteries. So we're also investing in hydrogen fuel cell, and we've got 15 double-deck hydrogen fuel cell buses already running in Aberdeen. Now, none of this is possible without assistance from third parties because, as was alluded to earlier, there is a massive cost differential between electric buses and hydrogen fuel cell buses and their diesel equivalents. In fact, a hydrogen fuel cell bus can easily cost twice the price of a diesel equivalent vehicle. So we're very pleased that the Scottish Government has provided assistance through its ultra low emission bus scheme to help us purchase these vehicles. They contribute to a portion of the cost differential from the conventional diesel to the alternative fuel, and also provide assistance with the infrastructure. Infrastructure is an interesting issue. Not only do you have to provide the fueling or charging facilities in the depot, you've got grid connections, which can quite often be a limiting factor. And indeed, there is a need as we move to decarbonisation, not just of transport, but of other areas of living, particularly housing, education and health facilities, to look at the capacity of power supply grids more generally on a national basis to make sure that we've actually got enough to achieve all these objectives. But for a transport operator, we need to be able to invest full stop, not just in decarbonised vehicles. And that means we need to be able to operate efficiently and provide services that are rapid and are punctual and people want to use. And that means we need to work in partnership with local authorities to ensure that buses have priority on the highway network. That then allows us to operate efficiently, to invest in new vehicles, and to provide services that get people to their destination on time every day, and that then helps them consider modal shift. But I'd like you please just to take a step back from all this and think about two different scenarios. The emphasis today is largely on decarbonising vehicles, and particularly that emphasis on private cars. So everyone is exhorting us to go out and trade in a petrol or a diesel car and buy an electric car. So what happens if we achieve that? What happens if we get to 100% electric cars? Well, that is a dystopian situation in my view, because it's providing personal mobility for those who can afford it and who can actually physically drive a vehicle, but it's clogging up our highways with the same amount of congestion as we have today. And indeed, we're still getting local atmospheric pollution, particularly from those little particles that you get from brakes and tyres, the particulates. They're just as bad from electric vehicles as they are from conventional petrol and diesel vehicles. The alternative is to actually see a shift in society, a modal shift in the way in which we travel. Buses tick three large boxes. They achieve social equality because they're available to everyone, irrespective of their ability to drive a vehicle and whether or not they can afford to drive a vehicle, or indeed they choose to drive their own vehicle. They achieve economic objectives. They are the most efficient use of that limited resource we have, road space, which means that they can actually reduce congestion and utilise that space better, not just to move people, to free up space for the movement of goods and other freight and economic services. And they've got environmental benefits, not just in reducing the carbon, but also reducing the local atmospheric pollution, reducing severance, reducing noise, and making it easier for people to get about. So I would see that as being the utopian situation, but we need to do a lot to ensure that we get that utopian result and not the dystopian one. And that means convincing people to shift their travel habits, to shift their modes of transport. We need, in short, to start by educating people as to the true costs of their journeys, the internal costs, that's the true internal costs, not just the petrol or diesel and the parking charge, the insurance, the depreciation, the maintenance, and the amount of time that people waste looking for a parking space when they reach their destination. Then we need to inform them. We need to use clever technology, apps, websites, journey planners, mobility as a service to give them the information about the particular journey they want to take so they can compare their modal choices and options. And then we need to influence them, whether it is through penalising people through road charging or congestion charging for using private cars, or for encouraging them to use public transport and active travel so that they take the right choice where there is a modal choice available. And that way we're going to get the optimum solution for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks indeed, John. I think I'm really happy that you touched upon all these social aspects of how we understand transport these days, because I think as users, we also try to get the most comfortable option, but it's not always the most sustainable and definitely not the best one. So hopefully that will be picked up from the audience, and we'll get some more questions and debate about that. Let's move on. Back again to overseas. We're going now to Germany. Our last speaker is Eric Rüder, who is a business development manager for fixed gas detection solutions at Dr Safety. He's in Germany, as I said, and he has recently focused on hydrogen projects within the mobility sector, including safety aspects for the maintenance of hydrogen buses. He has previously worked at ThyssenKrupp and Blom-Voss in Germany, and he initially started studying industrial engineering at the University of Applied Science Nordl Academy in Elmshorn, where he focused on financial controlling and control engineering. Eric is based at Drager's global headquarters in Lübeck, and I would like to highlight that the company, Drager, is one of our main supporters in Aberdeen for the development of the first hydrogen lab at the School of Engineering in this case. We are really happy to get Eric here today to speak about his own experience in the sector. So Eric, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for the invitation. It's a complete privilege to be on this panel here among these brilliant experts. So my name is Eric. I'd like to give you a short overview of the, let's say, industrial view of our company here right now. So let's move on with the slides. Like this, as Alf just mentioned, I'm with the company Drager. Some of you might know this. Our topic is technology for life. Just to introduce roughly, or just to add some things, what hasn't been said so far. I'm in the sales development currently. I'm working for Drager for more than 7 years already, and fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, I have, let's say, 25 years experience in sales. The company itself, Drager Safety, for those of you who don't know this company, it's a family-owned company with more than 15,000 employees. Last year we had a turnover of roughly 3.5 billion euros, and as just mentioned earlier, the headquarters, that's where I'm based as well, is in Lübeck in Germany near the Baltic Sea. And we do have sales and service locations in more than 50 countries. Yeah, the main theme of the company is technology for life, and the reason behind it shall be explained in the next slide. Our customers usually can be divided into the medical and the safety issue. On the one hand, we do support and provide products for the hospitals, so the operating rooms, operating theaters. We install usually the devices, as well as in the premature care for the incubators. For instance, we provide these incubators. So the medical issue is one leg of our company, and the other leg is then the safety issue. You see here, some of you might know this, we supply for this fire service, breathing apparatus, helmets, the clothing, some safety devices. And for the industry, that's where I'm related to, usually we supply the mobile and fixed gas detection equipment, usually to run all the safety issues in a refinery, in petrochemical industries, but also in the automotive sector. And so at the end, our slogan, technology for life, means we do our best and our utmost to reach a certain quality. Otherwise, people might get in danger because our products are safety relevant. So to have then the turn to the hydrogen sector, as I said, I'm in the industry, in the safety business. We do have the German perspective here. The gas detection solution from Drager Safety we do have, that's what John just mentioned in Aberdeen, we do have some cities in Germany already have invested into hydrogen buses already. So these hydrogen buses have to be maintained from time to time. So they need a kind of maintenance area where all these buses, you see it here on the right picture, where all these buses have to be maintained. So these garage or maintenance areas have then to be covered and monitored for safety issue with hydrogen detectors. That's what we supply. And on the other hand, we do have currently projects with some waste truck manufacturers who are, let's say, trying to step over from the conventional drive into fuel cell drive. And therefore, as well, the garage and production areas of these waste trucks have to be monitored as well. These are just two examples of our, let's say, product variety and the mix where it comes to hydrogen. Let me just explain as well that, for instance, the German Bundesbahn, so the railway, is currently thinking of having a fuel cell train as well. It may take a little bit longer, as usual, by the German Bundesbahn, but at the very end, the idea is to have a zero-emission train or zero-emission trains running in Germany, and the intention is now to have the first train in 2024. That's not far away from our perspective, so this is also a nice project where we try to supply and support then our customer. Yeah, and I'm really looking forward for any questions and answers which may come up here in the next minutes. Thanks first.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, all speakers. I'm going now to, I was going to mention as well that the company Dragon is a great example of how to shift or to apply the know-how from, oil and gas technologies, for example, into new and renewable energies too. So I'm going to introduce you to our other two panelists today who are colleagues of mine at the University of Aberdeen. So first of all, I would like to welcome Dr. Catelyn Cottrell, who is a director of the University of Aberdeen Centre for Transport Research and a senior lecturer in engineering. She has worked in the transport sector for over 20 years, beginning her career as a transport planner before moving into academia. Catelyn's work addresses the use of emerging technologies in passenger transport, with particular focus on public and active modes. And her work covers issues related to transitions towards alternative fuel vehicles, reducing car ownership and use, and considerations of equity and equality. The Catelyn currently serves as the Energy Technology Partnership's Zero Emission Mobility Theme Champion. And it's, I think, a great, well, as an expert on the Scottish perspective. So thanks a lot, Catelyn, for being here. Can I just ask you, Betty, because I know that you don't speak now, but can I just ask you briefly, why exactly is car ownership? Is it something about sharing cars? Is that what is it meant to be, or is changing the way that we use the cars?
It's going back partly to what John was talking about. So really, if a lot of the research that I've been doing has been taking an avoid, shift, improve approach. So it's basically saying that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to addressing the environmental impacts of transport. So avoid means trying to reduce as many trips as possible. So today is a good example. Everyone's taking part. Most of us didn't have to travel to do so. I mean, I traveled up the stairs in my house, but that didn't require much energy except for me. Shifting is trying to change the way that we travel. So going away from private vehicles onto public transport, or walking, cycling, scooters, kayaks where applicable, which may be more applicable as we warm up, and then improving. So that's where we're talking about trying to improve, the shift towards electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, alternative fuels, etc. So car ownership kind of fits into that, but it's part of a bigger package. Hope that makes sense.
It does actually. Thanks, Catelyn. So our last member of the panel today is my colleague, Dr. Ashley Hurst. So Ashley is a chartered mechanical engineer by first degree, with many years in the traction, power generation, and oil and gas industries, and 20 years in environmental science. Ashley is a reader in environmental science at the School of Biological Sciences, researching the impact of energy transport and other anthropogenic activity on land use and the environment. And we've had quite nice discussions in the Center for Energy Transition about the impact that all this transition is taking place. I'm going to ask you one short question, Ashley. I know that you've been an observer on the COP26, and I want to ask you, what's the feeling about that? Do you think that it will be worth and we'll get something out of it, or you seem to be very optimistic?
I would say that I'm fairly optimistic. I can see a lot of progress over the 2 weeks, and I am struck by the fact that I didn't hear one climate denier, even from the places where you think they'd come from. So, and if you look at sort of the big oil producing countries like Qatar, United Arab Emirates, they had very large stands, and they had almost all signed up to this net zero by 2050, which is quite amazing. I also, during the course of the week, you could see that, for example, you had Brazil and Philippines and Indonesia and the Congo signing up to the reforestation or to stop deforestation by 2030. And that is quite amazing. And also, you know, there were many other things like stopping fugitive methane. There was a lot of groups that formed around transportation, heavy goods vehicle transportation, and so on. The other thing that I found very, very heartening was the fact that not only did the parties, which are the countries, sign up, but many companies that signed up to this zero carbon. And for example, oil companies, Ford, Mercedes-Benz, many engineering companies. And also the other thing is that I was absolutely amazed that you know, on all the side ones, there were a lot of detailed discussions going on, which were very heartening. So I'm 99% positive and 1% negative, shall we say.
That's great. I wish I could get these statistics in my research as well. Right. So thanks everyone again. Obviously, and now it's the time for questions and a debate. I would like to encourage everyone in the audience to publish your questions. Remember that, as one lecturer told me once, there are not stupid questions, there are just stupid answers. So please go ahead and make the best of the time of this fantastic panel we have. We have a couple of questions already from the audience, so I'm going to start just reading them. This one is addressed to Catherine in Arizona. So, Adam Arfawi wants to ask if you believe that is enough research or discussion into the embodied energy to manufacture electric vehicles to replace a conventional diesel or petrol. And then a follow-up question is, well, the environmental cost to extract those resources, and we're talking about cobalt, lithium, and obviously all these metals that are needed for this, the catalyst eventually, will be worse than actually using the existing fossil fuel infrastructure. So, Catherine, that question is addressed to you, but obviously I'm going to open up to the rest of the panel because I'm pretty sure we all have a view on that.
Thank you for the question. So my research primarily focused on the operating emissions of transport. And the reason that I kind of went down that route was because a lot of the EU policy at the time when I was doing my research focused on how to reduce the operating emissions of vehicles. But while I was doing my research, I was also able to do a comparison using a life cycle analysis model that was developed from the University of Oxford and the University of Leeds to compare the full life cycle of vehicles. I focused primarily on electric cars, like your personal cars, cars with your diesel or petrol cars. And the results of that kind of indicated that the full life cycle analysis was about a third more emissions produced than from the operating emission side of electric vehicles. So sort of considering that going forward, that there'd probably be about a third higher level of emissions. However, with that said, our research highlighted that if you're reducing the operating emissions of a vehicle, everything else that comes with the vehicle is also going to reduce in emissions. So hopefully that kind of addresses your question there.
I think so. You're giving pretty precise numbers on that. Does anyone else from the panel have a view on that? Wants to comment? Please be my guest. Otherwise, we can move on. So we got another question for Catelyn, actually, and again, so you've been very popular in the network. So reverting back to your PowerPoint presentation, what are the current challenges to move to an electrical hydrogen-based transportation mode or cars? And I'm going to expand this question as well for Catelyn, who I know is an expert on this topic too. So Catelyn, what's your view on that? What challenge do we have there?
Thank you for the question again. I think John will probably have some input here as well. One of the big challenges I think will be the infrastructure, especially for public transport, making sure that it's placed in a situation that is convenient for the vehicles itself. Electric transport will obviously have to be charged much more regularly than hydrogen transport based on the range of the vehicles. So that's going to be a big factor, as well as the cost of everything. How are we going to pay for it? And I think something that we haven't really touched on here, but I think is also going to be important moving forward if we're going to meet our targets, is the impact of COVID. Because getting people back onto public transport and actually just getting people onto public transport is going to be a challenge in itself, especially with COVID and social distancing. So I think that is going to be a big challenge. And I'll open up to the rest of the panel if anybody wants to add anything else in, but there were the two sort of key challenges I foresee.
John, would you like to come in? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. On the infrastructure side of things, then, as I mentioned briefly in my talk, there are two elements to that. One is the actual point of fueling or charging, and the other is the grid and the need to build in sufficient resilience to the supply grid to ensure that there is sufficient power, whether it's electricity, whether it's hydrogen, to be able to meet all these conflicting demands. There is also an issue between public and private charging facilities, in particular when it comes to electricity. So in Europe now, we've got the forthcoming alternative fuels infrastructure regulation, which is being developed towards the end of this year and into 2022, which is going to focus on particularly charging for private vehicles. This is a bit of a concern for us who are operators of public transport, because the provision of abundant electric car charging facilities in new residences, in shopping centres, and even on the curbside is going to do nothing to deter people from continuing to use their private vehicles in the same way as they do today with petrol and diesel vehicles, and in fact potentially is going to make it even harder to achieve this modal shift to public transport, whereas our charging facilities are largely not publicly available. Although anybody who happens to be in Glasgow at the moment before COP26 ends, I urge you to go and have a look at what we're doing at Caledonia, because we are actually making our overnight bus charging facilities available for other people to use when they're not needed for our buses. But there is a need to provide charging at public locations for public transport, particularly for longer distance bus services and interurban bus services, where the operator has chosen to go down the electrification route rather than the hydrogen fuel cell route, and the vehicle needs a charge halfway through its duty. Perhaps when it's arrived in its destination city, it sits on layover for a couple of hours, takes a top-up charge that will give it enough power to take it back to the location in the country where it's travelled in from. But we need to take a holistic approach. And again, in Europe, the establishment of the 10T nodes gives us the opportunity for introducing such facilities as part of a wider international and national government policy. But just picking up on one of the other points that Catherine made there, one of the key challenges we face at the moment is that passengers are not returning to public transport in the rates at which we hope they would do post-COVID. We've got a real problem with counteracting the negative publicity that many governments put out at the beginning of the pandemic. Walk, cycle or use your car, avoid public transport. And that's exactly what people are doing. And it's very difficult to actually plan for the future when you're looking at patronage, which is typically only 70–75% of what it was at the beginning of 2020. We've got an awful lot of ground to make up before we can actually begin to invest more and to provide even better services that will encourage people to shift modes.
Yep, thanks. That's actually a very fair point. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that. Eric?
Yeah, just sorry, Catelyn?
Nope, go ahead, Eric.
Sorry. Well, just to add what John and Catherine just mentioned, we have in Germany we do have the discussion going on not with public buses, as I just mentioned. We have in certain cities this investment already for public buses, and the bus transportation is quite it's quite nice. Let's say, although having still this COVID situation. But in the private sector, we still have this chicken and egg discussion about fuel stations and the necessity of having more fuel stations, the range of the private cars when it's electric driven. So there's the willingness in the population to invest in this new feature. But as I said, when looking into our own company, our sales force still drives conventional cars because they need to get to a certain place, and it cannot be that they have to wait for hours to recharge again. So the range of the cars is also, let's say, the impact. That's the current German let's say discussion, which is still going on when it comes to private cars.
Thanks, Catelyn. I think you wanted to come in as well, and then Ashley probably too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of small points, and I wanted to say I agree with everything that's been raised. I think we have a lot of challenges ahead. But a couple of points that have been in discussion, and Catherine alluded to the first one, I think, in her talk. But it's the need to do upskilling. I mean, we've got, not only the development of the vehicles, but there's also operations, maintenance, repair, etc. And it's different for hydrogen vehicles, for electric vehicles. The equipment that's required to do that is different. And so we need to think about transitioning a workforce as well, and making investment in the ability to do the operations and maintenance to help give consumers the confidence and to give the public transport companies people to hire who have the right skills to be able to undertake this work, because that's a pretty critical factor in making sure that buses and trains run on time. I think the second thing that I end up talking a lot about in my research is thinking about the equity issues, because at the moment there is a huge price differential between electric vehicles and conventional vehicles, and there's also a lack of electric vehicles in the secondhand or used car market, and that's where a lot of lower income persons tend to buy vehicles. So what we don't want is a situation where we've kind of moved to a point where only very wealthy people can buy cars. While I would appreciate it if no one owned a car, I don't own one, and that's a very happy thing in my life. We don't want that to be a forced requirement simply because there's not any sort of equity addressed within that. So I think those are our two challenges that I would see as well.
Yeah, David, I think you wanted to mention something about that as well, right?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add, I mean, quite a few of the last few comments, really do relate to this concept of just transition, and, the just transition can be applied to sort of the different aspects of this future world, whether it's about the sort of transition of skills from an offshore oil and gas workforce into a sort of new energies workforce, but it's also about the public, and it's also about the public not being disadvantaged because there's either a lack of availability or there is a pricing structure that means that people can't afford the cars that they need for their everyday lives. So we're going to have to see some interesting models develop in the sort of I would say the next 5 to 10 years, just in terms of making these new vehicles available to people. You mentioned the interest-free, but I want to challenge the concept of financing, just in terms of delivering some of this sort of wider infrastructure that's going to be needed, and just how we deliver this low carbon future. And I too was at COP26 last week. I too quite encouraged by proceedings in terms of what appears to be some really good global commitments to work together in a way that we've never ever worked as nations together before, and that was coming out fairly clear at a few of the things I attended. But also I think we need to reprogram our minds in terms of the financing generally on transition. John Kerry, the climate ambassador for the US presidency, used in just everyday language the fact that we need to spend trillions on this energy transition. And I think we need to start programming our minds that across the world, the spends on new technology and the deployment of new technology, skills, infrastructure, everything that surrounds it in terms of supply chain and jobs, we have to actually reprogram our minds as to what's actually required here, because this is a moment in time. A lot of people talk about the Paris agreements, but Glasgow is, I really hope, the sort of point in time where we really start in earnest to work as a planet to address both climate change and these energy systems and transportation systems of the future. And it's for all our future generations' sake.
Ashley, I think you wanted to comment as well. Thanks, David.
Yeah, I concur with all of the things that have been said so far. There is an elephant in the room, though. Well, actually, there's two, I think. The first one is this getting people to change. You've got the increase in teleworking, but we really have to make public transport really attractive to people, and maybe put a disincentive on having private transport where you can. So this is a whole bunch of things, like having Oyster cards for the whole UK, for example, or for example having buses meet trains, which actually today they don't. You get into Aberdeen. On the last train, there's not a bus in sight. You'll have to take a taxi, or somebody will have to pick you up in a car. So that's getting the convenience out to everybody. It also has to be affordable. And I just wonder what's going to happen to the cost of electric cars when the government wakes up to the fact the tax from fuel and road tax disappears. They're going to have to charge somebody something for electric cars. The other thing is, the other elephant, which is I think the biggest one, is if we're going to electrify heat and transport or hydrogenise it, you're going to need an awful lot of generation capacity. We're going to rely on renewable energy. Renewable energy needs land. And basically, you're going to have to probably triple or quadruple the generation capacity of just Scotland alone. And I don't think there's enough land there to put up enough wind turbines. On top of that, you're going to need to have some sort of dispatchable power to smooth over when the wind doesn't blow. So I think that will have a tremendous impact on the environment, biodiversity, and everything else. So I think the elephant in the room is, how do you do that equitably without damaging the environment as well?
Ashley, just to mention the offshore potential as well. We've got to refer to the offshore potential here. ScotWind 1 with 11 gigawatts of energy coming. We'll hear more about that in Scotland at the start of next year. There'll be a ScotWind 2. I think as another speaker alluded to, there's other sort of offshore electrification sort of projects on the go as well. So we do have offshore in the equation as well, and other forms of marine energy, including wave and tidal. And don't forget solar. You can do solar and PV in Scotland. Some people think you can't because of the weather, but you can in some places and make it work. PV relies on light, not necessarily heat, which we don't necessarily get too much of.
I agree, David. It's good to mention that because this is my area of research. Thanks, everyone. Now, I was gonna say there are quite a few questions here. Obviously, we're not gonna manage to answer them all, but I just wanted to say that we'll pass some of these to our speakers, and I'm pretty sure they will be happy to reply to you and to get in touch. I'm gonna pick up on something about energy integration because we're talking about hydrogen, we're talking about electricity, but it's definitely in the future, one view is that everything has to be integrated somehow, right? So what at the moment, so it seems like two worlds apart, but at the same time, and as David was mentioning, electrification of the offshore is going to bring renewable energies. So I don't know if you have any views on how this could be achieved, for example, based on your experience. So how easy it is to integrate these different energy vectors, electricity and hydrogen, and what is the way forward? What are the challenges here? It's a long question, actually. Perhaps, John, do you have, in your experience with the buses, what challenges do you think we could find from a practical point of view?
So electric power for buses is not particularly challenging for integration with existing fleets. You realise the full benefit once you convert a whole depot of operation to a particular power, and that way you can avoid the need for doubling up of facilities for fueling, for maintenance, and you've got maximum fleet flexibility. But that's not really always such a constraint for electric. It is a huge constraint for hydrogen. So for hydrogen, as in fact Eric has described, there is a need for specific detection equipment, and this means that practically you end up with separate maintenance facilities for a hydrogen fleet of vehicles as you do for a diesel fleet, because you've got different procedures, different skills and different processes that need to be applied. Electric, again, less of an issue. It's more really a case of being able to ensure that you can achieve some form of decarbonisation across the whole fleet that you operate at a given location, irrespective of range, irrespective of operating cycle. We do see changes in battery technology almost on an annual basis, so electric buses can run longer ranges. But that always comes with the cost penalty, and the risk is that we end up with the electric buses costing as much as the hydrogen fuel cell buses, even though they're giving that same equivalent range. But does that then render the hydrogen fuel cell buses redundant? So I think the real issue for me, for a bus operator's perspective, is going to come down to the actual ability to supply the location with power. Back to Ashley's point, is there sufficient generating capacity? My point about the grid, both from the national perspective and then at the local perspective, supplying the actual premises, these are going to be a bigger constraint, I think, within the next 5 years or so, as well as the actual affordability of all this.
Thanks. Just to follow up to Eric, there's a question about safety in hydrogen buses and cars, obviously. Maybe you want to, I know that hydrogen is normally labeled or tagged as dangerous because of all these previous experiences in the long past. What would be your message, Eric, on to get across, like the users, to make them conscious that hydrogen can be a perfectly safe technology, and if you think that the customers are still trying to get on with that?
I mean, thanks for the question. From the safety perspective, it's the hydrogen, the use of hydrogen in buses or in cars is not more dangerous than using conventional fuel. I mean, it has a different way of handling, but from the safety perspective, it's not let's say complicated or more dangerous. I would say it's kind of a tale that's usually has been told. But as you say, as we just see the transition into the use of hydrogen into public buses, we never have heard of any let's say accidents with this hydrogen thing. Using fuel cells, for instance, might be an option as well. So there's no from the safety perspective, no big issue. But coming back to what Ashley just said, the big elephant in the room. We have the German industry has just recently, let's say, figured out how much energy they need for this transition, for, let's say, transforming the cement industry, the foundries in Germany to use green energy, and that as a result, the output was like we need 5 times more energy as currently produced from wind turbines or the solar energy. So this is the really big issue from our perspective currently, where to get this energy from. Okay, offshore might be one solution, but there might be other options as well, and it's a challenge, I would say.
There's actually a question about nuclear energy that just popped up. It's a different, completely different, very interesting, right? Because
yeah, the future is nuclear energy, right? Yes.
No, but I mean that's what they call a yellow hydrogen at the moment, right? So it's a multicolor. I can see Ashley's faces probably is expressing. I just want to say that for those speakers and attendees that can stay for a few minutes, but probably we just can wrap up very quickly. But if you need to leave, I will be absolutely understood. Just a couple of questions, perhaps. One interesting thing about advanced and non-developed countries. So it is expected that obviously we're in some sort of privileged position, but at the same time we know that the energy transition has to be a global effect and a global thing. So I suppose that what is your view? How can we help or how can we make this happen globally in any country and obviously with different situations? Ashley?
Yeah, that was something that's one of the themes of this COP, was actually finance for transitioning in developing countries. But there was another very interesting one related to transport. And a lot of people were saying, well, if you in the OECD and the developed countries all buy electric cars, we don't want to get all of the secondhand diesel and petrol cars dumped on us. And I think, you know, if you look in the past, when the Berlin Wall came down, all of the old bangers of Europe were transshipped into Eastern Europe. And there's a precedent for that. So all of these developed countries were especially in Africa, were very concerned that that's what might happen. So that's a caveat that they have.
Yep. Any further comments on this? Okay. I think it is clear, right, that different velocities is always an issue. We've probably seen this with the vaccination of COVID, for example, and the way that this is evolving. I think probably just to wrap up, there is a question about the UK labour force in terms of shifting. We've touched upon the skills. I'm gonna ask David probably about that because, well, just to put it on the context of Aberdeen. Obviously, Aberdeen has been well known for the oil and gas sector, and now we have to shift into this. We are shifting into renewable energy sectors and flourishing opportunities. So, how do you see this transition happening in the region, David? And what do you think we could do to, for example, as a university or as a center for research, what could we do to make it happen faster or more efficiently? You're mute.
Sorry about that. The energy transition, you know, it's such a broad set of both industrial and societal changes that, you know, there are so many different areas that you could prepare for. So, you know, there is an element of concentrating on strengths and concentrating on areas where you can actually deliver and make a difference. But yes, the area has this 50 years of North Sea oil and gas and working in difficult conditions, some really brilliant engineering over the years. So we've got to transition from something into something else. So we can't just knock the the oil and gas piece just kind of straight out. There's a clearly sort of pressure on that industry now to both decarbonize its operations, and there are challenges in terms of new exploration. But let's also remember that we won't see the sort of phase out of new petrol cars till 2030, I think it is, for new petrol cars, 2035 for hybrid cars. Please correct me if I've got those numbers wrong, but let's just be clear that this is a sort of transition. So we need to work well with our existing organisations and all the associations that associate them to find a way that we transition in a way that is a just transition for the status quo, but it also creates a transition that's fair for society. I think the opportunity for the universities, not just Aberdeen, but more broadly, is the fact that there are so many different disciplines that are needed to deliver these new energy projects. You still have to do an environmental impact assessment for an offshore or an onshore wind farm, which brings in a multitude of disciplines, whether it's geologists, archaeologists, physics experts, biological experts. There's just this broad spectrum of skills that are going to be needed to deliver both marine renewables, both onshore renewables, but also what we're talking about today, the sort of transportation systems of the future. So not just the vehicles, but the infrastructure. And there's going to be a lot of work to keep a lot of people busy for quite some time to get this to where it needs to be.
That sounds great. So I'm going to finish now. Just thanks, David, with around one question for all of you. So around the questions, then we just probably can wrap up because it's already getting late. So the question is whether, well, 2045, 2050 is almost there, and 2035 is even closer. So I'm going to ask you just briefly, yes or not, are we going to make it for net zero in transport? So John, do you think we'll make it?
Yes, if we can achieve behavioural change.
Okay, good. Ashley?
Yeah, we have to. We absolutely have to.
That's good. David? You're mute again. Sorry, David, you're mute. It's a pity. It looked like a really good speech, but...
Oh, I'm sorry about that. It was very good as well, what I had said. I would said that we actually have to do it, but we also have to find the innovation that's going to help to deliver this energy transition. There are some ideas and solutions out there that are yet to be found.
Thank you. Catelyn, what do you think?
Yes, we absolutely have to make several changes in terms of what we're going to do, but we actually have to achieve it if we're going to get there.
Eric?
Well, yeah, I'm quite confident that we will achieve it. We have to change some attitudes, I guess, and well, as David just said, yeah, to be more innovative than we've been in the last 10, 20 years. But I'm quite confident to reach the target. Yes.
Thank you. And finally, last but not least, Catelyn.
I think we certainly have the opportunity and the ability to reach the targets. Doing that, however, requires just really such a multidimensional approach, requiring behavior change, mindset change, change in investment, and really thinking globally. It's not just about, we are, as we've said, in a privileged position in the UK and in Europe, and trying to figure out how to address wider problems, I think, is going to be critical and a critical part of that.
Thank you. I love being surrounded by optimistic people. It's great. So thanks. I'm just going to wrap up by thanking again all the attendees. Thank you for coming, but especially our speakers, John, David, Catelyn, and Eric, from spending time today and sharing your experiences, and obviously my colleagues Ashley and Catelyn as well for helping organize this seminar, and also the people behind the scenes, Martin and Brian, and everyone in the CT who has contributed for this seminar. I'll say it again, I think this has been recorded, so if you want to have a look again, then you just have to probably log into the CET, Center for Energy Transition YouTube channel. I think it will be ready in a couple of weeks, I've been told. And I know there are a couple of questions that we didn't have the time to go through, but we'll try to rescue them and get them to our panel, and hopefully we can get back somehow. Okay, so once again, thank you very much for spending this fantastic afternoon with us, and hopefully we can organize the same panel in maybe 1 year or 2 years time, and then we have more things to be optimistic for. So thanks a lot, all the best, and speak to you soon.